Cool. So I have a bit of a hodgepodge of a demo here. So the first thing, there was a bug where there were some users who were unable to upload content or interact with Storytel at all after they logged in for the first time. And so the two users were Caroline and John. Um, some background, Jing did some digging, and apparently there was a bug where their accounts existed in Firebase, but not our MySQL table. And so for some context on why those are two different things, they sort of serve two different purposes. So Firebase is like our authentication system that is hosted by Google, that does sort of all of the heavy lifting regarding security and maintaining authentications. Like when a user logs in, we don't have to worry about storing their password on our side or anything. They handle that. They manage the cookie that lets us know that the user's logged in, all of that authentication tokens, all of the stuff we don't want to have to worry about. But at the same time, we're obviously logging every time that a user interacts with Storytel or generates a new report or something. And so we need to be able to associate all of those actions with the user. So we need some notion of the user on our side. And so that's why there's these sort of two different entities. There's the Firebase user, which actually is the authenticated user, and MySQL, which is our notion of the user. And those were getting out of sync. And so I wanted to quickly show why I think that happened. And I'll dive into some very minimal code here just to kind of illustrate what the process is when a user actually signs up. So this is the front end functions. This is JavaScript. So we're looking at the front end here. When a user creates an account, first thing we do is this is for Firebase. So we tell Firebase, here's a new user, here's their email and password. And then as soon as we get a response from Firebase, we send them an email verification to the user. And then right after that, we create a user on our system. And so these are sort of steps that happen sequentially. And there should be little to no latency between these steps. But what I imagine happened is that occasionally users will navigate away sometime between these steps. Like we'll call Firebase and then they'll go to another page or something, or the page will refresh or something happens that interrupts this flow. So this step never ultimately happens, which is how those things can get out of sync. That's at least my theory. And so we did there's an RCA doc here. And so feel free to reference this. There's, I think, 21 users that were affected. Some of these are actually like test accounts. So not something less than 21 users were actually affected, but I'll fill out more of this RCA doc going forward, but also just kind of wanted to share our process for decision-making when handling things like this. So I came up with sort of 3 shorter term to longer term fixes for this. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but we ultimately settled, at least initially, on this first solution, which is that if our backend receives activity from a user that it doesn't recognize in our database, it will just sort of dynamically add that user to our database. So it's kind of a fix to reach eventual consistency, meaning like eventually it will be in sync as long as the user does something on our website. So it should solve that issue. There are much more complex and robust solutions here that would take a lot longer. So feel free to peruse this if you're interested. So that was one thing. I imagine we'll talk more about the RCA in some future meeting, but wanted to share that. Any questions on that piece before I jump ahead? Awesome. So this next thing you'll notice now on any content that has a URL associated with it, there is now this view source content link where there used to be, it's like view full report or something. And so this will take you to the actual source page. So in this case, it's a YouTube link, or there's like a Wikipedia page, I think. And then, of course, the main motivator here was for the Gartner account, which now has a bunch of test data that was scraped from their website. So all of that content has an associated link. The caveat here is that any content that is from media or a PDF or a text file or something, that link doesn't exist because we have not yet addressed like the hosting solution to make that possible. So that's something we'll address probably in the near future, I think. So I think that's pretty much all I had on that. Any questions there before I jump on to the last little thing? Cool. And last very little thing, this is a bug fix. For a while, these exec summaries on the right, on the third panel of the My Knowledge were disappearing. There were 2 separate bugs, one on the front end, one on the back end, that was preventing it from being generated in the first place and rendered even if it existed. So both of those are fixed. There is a separate bug that I filed where it looks like the scroll in the third panel isn't working. So there is content beneath this that's not currently accessible. So we'll address that separately, but just wanted to call it out that is now fixed.